I need to build a bulkhead in here. And ideally it would go behind here because this floor is raised up that much from down. This is the hull here. So I'd really like the bulkhead to go all the way down to the hull. And so the failure of that plan is why the mini bulkheads were put under the bunk. And this bulkhead is going to go in front on the raised up floor. So I got some big pieces of cardboard and I made a template that's pretty much the shape of the hole. And back at my garage, I've got a piece of honeycomb core, and I'm going to use the cardboard template to trace out the shape that I need and then cut it out of the honeycomb. And back at the boat, I'm going to put it in place and then do a little final trimming just to get it to fit a little bit better. It's a lot easier to cut it now that I can cut it with a razor knife. And I went on the other side and I traced out a potential opening for a door. And now back in Vero Beach, I'm more or less straightening up that door shape and cutting it out. And there's going to be a bunch of layers of 1708 fiberglass that will go over this. And it gets a little bit redundant, so I'll only show cutting out a few of the pieces. Each side will start out with at least 3 layers. A full-sized layer that's all one sheet. And then a middle layer will be made of a whole bunch of little pieces that get pieced together and glued in place. And then a final layer will be all one sheet again. That's just the beginning. There'll be a lot more fiberglass on here before this is done. And doing the other side is equally redundant, so I didn't show all the layers on that. And after the layup, you have to go around, and there's a little bit hanging over the edge of the core everywhere, so it gets ground back to approximately where the core ends. And I don't have an air hose, so I use that little turbo to blow debris out of where I cut the core. And I paint mainly just the edges with some resin and lay a little strip of chopped strand mat and then some resin on top to close in the cut edge of the core on the inside of the door frame and on the outside of the door. The outside of the bulkhead doesn't have to get this treatment because it's going to be glued to the hull of the boat. So once I've laid the chopped strand on the inside to close off the edge of the core, some of it hangs over, of course, so I sand that back till it's flush with the surface on each side. So I've got the piece of honeycomb that was cut out originally for the door. And I'm tracing about a 1/4 inch or 1/3 of an inch edge around it and trimming that to try and guess at like how much space I need for the gap between the door, the hinges, and also the fiberglass that gets laid up to close off the edges of the honeycomb. So the door can be lightweight, so I'm making that out of the fiberglass for that out of lightweight 3/4 inch chopped strand mat. And I'm also cutting out a bunch of extra strips like this that will be used eventually to close in the edge of other pieces of honeycomb core. So each side gets just one layer of this 3/4 ounce chopped strand mat. So the door will be much lighter than the bulkhead that it goes in. And in preparation for putting in the hinges, I'm gouging out some of the core at the edge here. And I'm painting these pieces of wood with resin, and I'm going to inlay them using thickened resin in that slot where I carved away the core a little bit. And this is so that the screws for the hinges can go in the wood, because the honeycomb core is too light to hold a screw. So this is the door, and I'm sanding mainly where the fiberglass on each side went over the edge, and it's nice and straight and trimmed right to the edge of the honeycomb core now. And this is doing the same thing. I'm gouging out a little bit of the core, and I'm going to inlay a piece of wood here, and this will be where the other side of the hinge screws into the door. So the door and the door frame each get a wood inlay where the screws for the hinge will go. And this is closing off that area again, covering it over with fiberglass. That is by far the lightest way to close the edge of the core. So after sanding all of that flush with the surface, I can move on to the next step. I really like putting the gel coat on. It kind of makes the part seem like it's getting finished somehow. It looks more like a piece of a boat. So a test fit to see how does the door fit now that the edges are closed in and everything. And yeah, this is going a lot more smoothly than the first door. There is a little bit of an issue with the fiberglass that was laid over the wood inlay. But I'm just going to sand off what sticks up and then put in some filler that is just thickened resin and some milled glass fibers. So that's the thickened resin and milled fibers. And as soon as that's hardened, I can sand that smooth, and that pretty much takes care of that repair. And now I wipe down with acetone, and maybe next time I can actually attach the door.